Yeah.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Phoenixville Public Library. I'm Mark Pinto, the Adult Services Director, and we are pleased to present another in our ongoing series collaborating with other organizations in the community gardening around the village. Tonight's event stars Jessie Shiffler, who is head of the local chapter of an organization called Wild Ones, who will speak to us tonight about the benefits of using native plants in your gardens and landscapes. Welcome, Jessie.
Great. Thanks for having me. About 5 or 6 years ago, my husband and I started keeping honeybees because we thought we were going to save the world, or at least help. And we joined all of our local clubs, and I'm sitting at beekeeping meetings and trying to learn about beekeeping. And I have a very short attention span, so I would wander off and look at the plants that were outside of Cheslin Preserve, because that's where the meetings were. And I noticed tons and tons of insects, bees, butterflies, all sorts of things on this plant that I didn't know what it was. I had never seen it before. I hadn't really been paying attention to plants very much. And doing a little research, I realized, oh, okay, this is mountain mint. It's a native plant. I'd never really heard of native plants or knew about the concept of native plants. So as I got less and less interested in the non-native honeybee, I became more and more interested in native plants and how their part in our ecology just builds everything else up. So from there,
You pointed at the laptop.
here,
Yeah. Down to go forward.
do I have to say a spell?
No?
He said press down to go
Down
forward.
to go
or something.
forward.
I'm going down. Maybe my water bottle in here. I know, we practiced.
You have mountain mint in your yard. I remember seeing it.
Do you know which type of mountain? Do you know which type of mountain?
Oh no, we're giving away all our secrets. Okay.
Now it seems to be working.
You fixed it, you're magic. Okay. So, from that little bit of interest, I started the local chapter of a national nonprofit called Wild Ones. Our whole mission is to educate people about the importance of native plants in all landscapes. So that started in 2020 with the pandemic. We're still going strong. I still am Hattrick Honey's bee buddy, but my husband does all of that hard work. I will be graduating from Mount Cuba Center's Ecological Landscape Design Certification Program this June. I served as the Horticulture Committee Chair for the CCBA, which is the Chester County Beekeepers Association, with the intention of getting tons and tons of native plants into beekeepers' hands so that they could help give back. Natural Lands trained Forces Nature volunteer. I sit with my Environmental Advisory Council and talk to them about native plants and how we get them in our township. And I volunteer for great places like the Perfume and Watershed, along with others. And I've been fortunate enough to talk to professionals and people whose career it is to do these kinds of things. This is just my hobby. I'm passionate about it, but I have a full-time job that sadly has nothing to do with plants. So this is the way I refuel. We are losing insects and birds and other native animals at an alarming rate. Our highly industrialized agricultural system, with its reliance on an overuse of chemicals and our overpopulation, have decreased our open spaces and our natural lands to the point that our insects can't survive. If our insects can't survive, our birds can't survive, and up through the food chain. But we, as homeowners, or as people who have any influence over any piece of ground, can change that. We can create habitats so that insects can thrive. this is how we do it. We take a piece of our property, put a little bit of work in. If we have the money and not the time, we pay somebody to do it. If we have the time and not the money, we do it ourselves. And we plant native plants. This is my absolute favorite native plant, Joe Pyeweed. Brings all the butterflies to the yard. So if somebody says, but I love my butterfly bush, you say, I love it even better dead, and plant Joe Pye. And there you go. You'll get lots and lots of butterflies, but you'll also be hosting the native Lepidoptera that can eat Joe Pye. There are no native Lepidoptera that can eat butterfly bush. There are four main parts to my talk tonight: native versus non-native, choosing the right plants, some simple ways to start, and then at the end some resources. First off, native versus non-native. There are tons and tons of definitions for native versus non-native, and depending on who you ask and where you go, you're going to get a different answer and a different region. Some things say native, and they are native to somewhere in the United States, maybe. They might be just to the North American continent, maybe. And then other things, when they say native, they mean I grew it from a seed that I found that was native here 10,000 years ago, and I pulled it out, and now I'm growing it. So it's native to 20 feet away. The definition I like the most is by Doug Tallamy, because it is all-encompassing. It's a plant or an animal that has evolved in a given place over a period of time sufficient to develop complex and essential relationships with the physical environment and other organisms in a given ecological community. It's the relationships that are important. And a relationship is give and take. It's not just take. It's not that a bird can use it for berries. It has to be mutual. So native matters. Why choose native, though? It adds biodiversity. We need that. But also, you don't need to subsidize it with other things. You don't need to fertilize it. You don't need to give it extra water after it's established. Every young thing needs care and attention. But once it's established, if you've chosen the right plant for the right place, you don't have to add extra water. It doesn't need pesticides. In fact, the opposite. You're planting it for the insects. You want to see little nibbles on your leaves. Native plants are providing food and habitat for wildlife. They then let you go out and get closer to that wildlife or the signs of wildlife. They're beautiful. There's a native plant for every patch of ground and even pots that there are. Besides that, you can also choose native plants that benefit humans, but they're also benefiting wildlife. For example, top right corner is elderberry. You can harvest those berries, make a great syrup, treat a cough. The flowers, if you collect enough of them, I'm told you can make I've sampled really good liqueur from it. I've not made my own. But those blooms are covered in insects. The berries, we get some, the birds get some, everybody benefits. The birds then spread the berries, hopefully to the woods by my house, so that they can repopulate the elderberries that would be there if they weren't outcompeted by the burning bush and bush honeysuckle and invasives. But blueberries are in the middle, a native plant. You'll never taste a better blueberry than the one you pull off your own bush that's not full of chemicals and pesticides. A second after I took that picture, that wasp flew off with that whole blueberry. I was just amazed that it could fly with it. It was crazy. So he got one of them. I was happy to share. Top left, it's hard to tell in that picture, but there are the leftovers of a squirrel picnic on the picnic table of those hazelnuts. It was super cute that they let me see the mess they made. I really was glad I could provide for them. I think we got one hazelnut off that bush. Two, we got two. The squirrels got the rest of them. But I'm happy to provide for them. They provide entertainment, I provide hazelnuts. So, native plants provide host sites. That means that the larvae stage of Lepidoptera moths and butterflies, the caterpillars can eat those plants. They can be a nectar and pollen source for thousands of insects. Some insects are specialists and can only eat the pollen of certain plants, or they can only feed that pollen to their babies. Berries for birds, nesting materials for birds, shelter for small creatures. The monarch butterfly is the poster child for a specialist insect. Everybody knows that the caterpillar of a monarch needs milkweed. It can't eat other plants, it has to eat milkweed. Most caterpillars are like that, where they can only eat one or two plants. Maybe they can eat plants from the same species or genera, rarely a whole family, but most of them have a specialized relationship because they've co-evolved with those plants for hundreds of thousands of years. And the plants don't want to be eaten, so they've built up chemical defenses so that they're not eaten. And insects have put in that evolutionary energy into overcoming those defenses for just those few plants, not all of the plants. That's why they can only eat the ones that they have evolved with and overcome those defenses. So, monarch caterpillar on milkweed, a list of butterflies and their host plants. In my yard, I was fortunate enough to have a volunteer catalpa tree. Catalpa hosts its own sphinx caterpillar. One year, the caterpillars defoliated half the tree. And I was like, oh no, like, is this an invasive caterpillar? I don't know, I'm very patient with what happens out there. So I watched it. The next year, the tree came back amazing, no problem. There were only a couple caterpillars that year. The following year, a bunch of caterpillars defoliated a quarter of the tree, but the tree was much bigger. It's a fast-growing tree. And I saw some of the caterpillars had these parasitic eggs on them. It's a parasitic wasp. They wiped out 90% of the caterpillars. So right there, I was seeing a whole ecosystem of a tree, its native host plant relationship with a caterpillar, and a parasitic wasp who specialized on that kind of a caterpillar to keep its population in check, protecting the tree, helping the whole ecosystem. It was really fascinating. And then the more I planted and the more I looked around, the more I saw these relationships. The snowberry clearwing caterpillar on coral honeysuckle, sawfly larvae that eat in the dogwood family. Like all of these great insects that I wouldn't see if I didn't have their host plants. The cutest caterpillar you'll ever see, spicebush swallowtail caterpillar. It looks like a tiny little cartoon snake. Looks like that to try and scare away birds. It's not very successful. But it hides in the rolled up leaf there in the right corner, the upper left corner, so that so the birds don't see it. It can only eat spicebush. Its secondary host is like a sassafras tree. But I see these all the time. I saw these, they showed up 3 weeks after I planted my first spicebush, and that plant was this big. So it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be in your landscape for very long, and these things will come. Now, if you've listened to Doug Tallamy's presentations, which if you haven't, I highly recommend you do, look him up. He's got lots of YouTube channel content out there. He's an entomologist from the University of Delaware. He lives in Chester County. He wrote Bringing Nature Home, Nature's Best Hope. If you need a book to read to help change your mind about any of this, read those books. He said sometimes things don't show up. He's been waiting 10, 15 years for things to show up from things he planted. But in that time, so many other things showed up that he wasn't anticipating. So give it time. Some things happen right away, some things take time.
Jessie? Someone up front didn't hear the name you said?
Doug Tallamy. Non-native plants. So there's tons of them out there. They may serve one or two of the functions we talked about. They might provide some temporary, probably poor nutrient-based food for the adult insects, because the caterpillars can't eat their leaves, but they may provide blooms that some insects will eat. And they might make some berries for birds, which is part of the problem, because if there's nothing else to eat and the birds eat the invasive plant berries, they spread those, hence spreading the invasive plants. And they may provide some shelter, but at a cost. They're displacing native plant species. I have an example I want to read to you because it's pretty impressive, and it is from Doug Tallamy's book, Nature's Best Hope. The non-native kudzu will host the native silver-spotted skipper butterfly. It does host one native species. However, the native oak tree would host 454 species of caterpillar if it wasn't displaced by the non-native kudzu. At the same time, the kudzu also displaces black cherry, a host for 324 caterpillars, and the willow, which hosts 247 caterpillars, the hickory for 229, and the maple for 223. So that's 1,477 species that could be hosted if the natives were allowed to grow there. But instead we have kudzu that will host one species. So that's an example of how terrible non-native invasive plants are. And that includes turfgrass. Turfgrass is essentially useless. It's really great for letting your dog poop on. We need a spot for that to happen. It makes a nice, manageable pathway to your native meadows and your woodlands. But it's desolate of life. It doesn't support anything. It doesn't soak up rainwater. It's an outdated standard that we don't need to live to. We can do much better than that now. We know better. We should do better. Choosing the right plants. Value the life that your land harbors. Sarah Stein, it's another great book that you can read. It's called Noah's Garden, and it is similar to Doug Tallamy's more scientific book. It's very poetic and well written, and it is inspiring, talking about the transformation that land goes through when you start focusing on native plants. Sometimes people want to keep some of their turf grass lawn because they say, oh, but my kids like to have a huge football game once every 4 years, and so I need to maintain that acre of turf grass, which is typically not the case. Most of our townships and our local parks have maintained fields. Most of our schools do. They're open to the public. For that one time every 2 to 4 years that your kid wants to put together an impromptu soccer game, send them down to the park. They do that. They manage that. Use your space, because kids actually really would like to explore in fields and in woods if they could. And their backyard could be that safari place. When you're choosing native plants, think about your goals. Is there a certain insect that you want to attract, something you're looking forward to seeing? Find out its host plant, plant that. When you're thinking about planting seeds, look at your ecoregion, not just the traditional cold temperature, the zones. Think about your ecoregion, how close those seeds are to having actually occurred here before human intervention. There are lots of great resources. These are websites that you can look to find the plants that will support pollinators. There are over 450 native bee species in Pennsylvania. There are more than 140 native butterfly species to Pennsylvania. So if you want to focus on just those pollinators, look at those lists, pick the ones that will fit the site conditions for your property, and go from there. And then you get to see awesome things like this huge leafcutter bee. It's on Culver's root. I planted it, and from plugs 2 years later, it's these nice big plants, and I get to see all these great bees. When you're planting, think about providing for all sorts of different insects, different flower shapes facilitate different insects to be able to reach their nectar and pollen. So providing different types of flowers blooming at the same time and throughout the whole season really helps. I get to go out in my yard and look for all of these cool, this evidence that things were there that I would have never noticed before I started learning about these things. The cutouts of leafcutter bees, native praying mantis euthecas. This picture here of the flower, this is some insect that is used those leaves to make some kind of a shelter. I didn't want to wreck its home to see what was in there, but super curious because that's fascinating to me. And those are big leaves, so I'm assuming it was a big critter in there. Wheelbug, egg masses. So you look around and it's a safari all year long.
Talk about the praying mantis, because I never realized that those the praying mantis that most people see is not native.
Right.
Right.
You're right. And we can talk about that.
Okay.
There are native and non-native praying mantises. The ones featured here are all native euthecas, native praying mantises. They're smaller than the invasive Chinese praying mantis that most people see. They look a little bit different. They hatch later. The native praying mantises hatch later. So people ask, well, how do you know that that is a native praying mantis? Because that little guy, who's smaller than the end of my finger, you can see, that was taken in August. Being that small in August means you're a native praying mantis, because the invasive praying mantises are much bigger. They hatch sooner. So it's a timing thing. It's learning the life cycle of the insects to figure it out. I'm not an entomologist. It's just a lot of careful research, and if I'm not sure, I let it be and wait and see. But definitely with the euthecas, the egg masses, you can distinctly tell the difference for those. And we can talk about that. Planting the host plants is what gives you the biggest ecological difference on your property. And then you get to see this cool variegated prominent moth caterpillar that blends right into the edge of the leaf that it was eating, so that it's, using its camouflage to try and hide. Once you know your goals, if you're trying to attract insects, if you're trying to attract birds, if you're just trying to create a healthy ecosystem for everything, you have to make some decisions. You have to consider what you have to work with, your soil conditions, your sun conditions. If you're fortunate enough to already have some mature trees, what part of your landscape you're lacking, which layer, is it the canopy, the understory, your shrub layer, herbaceous layer. Maybe you're fighting some invasive stilt grass, and so you need a good, healthy ground cover. Evaluate what you need to add. Think about site preparation, because that's going to be the difference between a successful project and a mess. And then plan to provide blooms and resources for wildlife in all seasons. Soil conditions, sun conditions, they can change throughout the seasons, and they're changing kind of on a yearly basis here in PA. This is a very, very wet, warm winter. It's anybody's best guess what the winters in the future are going to be like, but it seems most scientists think it's going to trend warmer and wetter, with periods of big droughts in between. So have fun with that. If we pick plants that are adapted to those conditions, hopefully they have time to evolve and catch up with the way climate is going. Think about the size of things, the size of the space you're trying to fill, the size of the mature plants that you're going to put in there, the size of your budget. Small plants cost a lot less than big plants. They also grow better. So if you have a big space to fill, pick a lot of small plants, aggressive plants that want to spread nicely, and you'll save a lot of money. And then keeping your goals in mind. Are you trying to fix a water mitigation problem? I'll show you some pictures of how I tried to do that. Talking about all of the layers in your landscape, the ground cover, herbaceous layer, shrubs, understory, and overstory canopy trees. Fill them all. That way we're packing lots of plants into the same horizontal space, and they're using that space vertically and through time to just fill it all. And if you have deer pressure, that's the way you overcome it. Just keep planting. They can't eat it all.
I bet.
They can try, but just keep planting. Know your conditions, choose accordingly. There are lots of native plants that want to be under shady trees, and they provide beautiful blooms for you to watch bumblebee butts, because it's the cutest thing you can watch. Site preparation. If you are wanting to do seeds, most of your native plant seeds need cold moist stratification. We're coming to the deadline for this year to get seeds out into the ground if you want them to be stratified to start germinating this year. Solarization uses the heat of the sun with a combination of plastic to bake the soil to kill weed seeds, to kill vegetation that's already there. But it takes planning, and you want to incorporate that into the hot months of summer so that you can do your cold moist stratification of your seeds outside in the following fall and winter, so that the year after that you then start with your growth. You can smother with cardboard for a year and plant, but there are plenty of pictures you're going to see where I do not have the patience for that. I smother, I plant immediately with pretty good success. You can get a sod cutter. It's great. You can plant immediately into it, but a sod cutter is a lot of work. It's really, sod is very heavy. So there are lots of ways to do it. I list tilling up here, but it would be a last resort. I don't recommend it. It pulls up more weed seeds than you really want to deal with, and it breaks up what good soil you may have. It injures those relationships that are in the soil that are building healthy soil for you. So if you can avoid it, I wouldn't do tilling. A timeline for using solarization, you can think about this for spring if you have a spot to do it in. You want to mow the turf grass low in May, cover it with plastic, leave it on until July when you uncover it for 2 weeks to let whatever weeds may be still viable grow. Then you cover it with plastic again. You uncover it in September, rake away the debris, sow your native seeds in October, and then in the spring you're going to mow every 4 to 6 weeks before weeds can flower. Most of those weeds that will come up that first year are annuals that survived that solarization or blew in from things surrounding you. So staying on top of it for that first year is the way to get rid of those annual weeds.
Question.
This is a solarization I did in my property.
Can I ask a question about your last slide? So what is the end goal here? Because if you're mowing, I mean, you still have grass there, right? Or what?
You're mowing it low enough so that you can put your plastic down and provide a good seal like this, so that you have less vegetation to try and kill.
Okay, but your last step talks about mowing every 4 to 6 weeks. So what's being mowed?
So that's what, after you've had germination of the seeds that you've sowed, you're mowing to keep the weed pressure low. You're not allowing those weeds that will still germinate to flower and produce more seed. You're taking the pressure off of the newly growing native plants, so they're putting down strong roots, and they're not trying to put excessive top growth that first year.
Okay.
Because if you're using this method, it's a long-term goal. You are going through a series of things. You're not going to have an instant meadow, but in 3 to 5 years, you're going to have a great plot of meadow. But it's not instant. Anytime you're starting anything from seed, you're in it for the long haul. So, you cover with plastic, you seal the edges so that the heat is trapped in there, it's baking all day long. You pull it back, rake away the debris, leave it open to the air so that it can germinate over a couple of weeks. You cover it back up. And then, so my slide had said sow your seeds in October, November. That's ideal. I didn't get to it. This was January. We mixed our seed mix from Ernst Seed. I wrote down which one it was. Let me tell you. It is the Showy Northeast Native Wildflower and Grass mix from Ernst Seed. We mixed it with kitty litter so that it would distribute more evenly. And we covered it with just a little bit of leaf mulch. This is what it looked like January 9th. Those stakes in the middle, you can see I put just a couple plugs in there to compare what would take better. And in June, I was having my doubts as to what was happening. Just a few of the plugs that I had planted were flowering. Everything else, I couldn't tell if it was the grass that was just growing back or what was happening. I mowed it probably too short the first time. I think if I could go back, I would have just weed whacked it at like 10 or 12 inches. Because I don't have a mower that goes that high. I was working with what I had. So a month later, I was feeling a little better. I'm like, okay, well, at least we got some things flowering. They're early successional things, but at least it looks better than turf grass. There's flowers in there. Birds were in there. It was lovely. September, some other late season things were starting to bloom. I still was iffy about the grasses. In the winter, I was like, well, this looks interesting at least. It's better than turf grass. There's seed heads in there for birds. I wonder what's going to happen in the spring. I got a lot of asters. I was really excited about those. Any one picture, it's hard to show all of the seasons and all of the fun things that are happening in there, but there were different things that were blooming. And then in October, full of asters. This aster species is aggressive. It wants to take over that plot, and I might just let it. I'm fine with that. But a buzz just filled with late season pollinators, because that is some really great nectar that those plants are putting out. That's the other side of that. Beautiful New England asters in there, just gorgeous. And it had just been turf grass before, so this is way better. Be patient with your plantings. We talked about smaller plants. The smaller they are, the less risk of transplant shock, the better rooted they're going to become, the cheaper they're going to be. The first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they go crazy. Another way that you can decrease your turf grass is just by desodding by hand. I did this in one afternoon. That wheelbarrow was very heavy. I planted immediately, covered it with leaf mulch, and I think that that picture is 6 weeks later. 6 weeks later. So in just 6 weeks, a lot of growth. 2 years later, I had to move the wall, the little foundation wall that I put around it, because everything is taken off like crazy. This year will be 3 years later. This is going to explode this year. Full of senna, full of downy wood mint. I'm not sure if you can appreciate it. The plant on the right, this plant right here, is a little alternate leaf dogwood. 2 years later, that's a tree. Like it's a distinct tree in 2 years. So it doesn't take long for these things to go crazy.
Did you get the seeds from the same mix, or?
For this, that was a mix of winter seed sown senna, say that 10 times fast, and plugs and plants of different sizes. So it wasn't all just a seed mix that I put in there. And the seeds were not from Ernst. They were from Hungry Hook Farm, which is toadshade wildflower, but they're on the list at the end. A different way that you can prepare a site, if you have access to chickens, allow them to scratch the turf grass. They will do that. I put them out in the same plot for about 2 weeks. Let them scratch all the turf grass. Surprisingly enough, they left all of the wild violets in the grass. They didn't eat them or scratch them, so I left them there, which I love them anyways. Once they had taken off all the turf grass and left all their good fertilizer, I planted. The following spring, it had filled in nicely. Bee balm in the summer. Fascinating even in the winter. Different plants blooming at different times in this plot. Milkweed. So I have lots of monarchs through the seasons. And then in its 3rd year, blooms from spring to fall, nectar and pollen for insects, host plants, fruit. I have some arrowwood viburnum in there that the birds just, I watch the catbirds sit there and pluck off the berries. It's so fun.
They're pretty selfish about it, too.
I'm sorry?
They're very selfish about it, too.
They, all
don't
day.
let other
They'll
birds
just take them
nearby.
all.
No.
Yep, all day. So fun. So, evaluate your area. Maybe your neighbor has a nice patch of something blooming that's covering a good season of bloom. So maybe you can focus on a different season, provide a little bit more, think of it as a collective. Providing at least 3 different flowering plants in each season will help the most and try and fill all of those vertical layers. When you're shopping for plants, pay attention to one, where you're shopping. That'll help you out the greatest. But to plant tags. Choose straight species, native plants when you can, because those have evolved alongside the local flora and fauna. So they bloom at the right time for the insects. They set berries with the right nutritional content for the birds at the right time. A trick into seeing if it's a straight species or not is that it will not have a fancy name in, what are these, quotation marks? Single quotation marks. It's not going to have that. It's going to look just like this. This is a native plant. If you put the fancy name on it, it means at the very least it has been cultivated for some human assigned trait. It could have been found in the wild to have an excessively beautiful bloom color. They changed nothing about it except that they plucked it or took its seed. It grew from seed like that, and they have propagated it probably by clone ever since. So they gave it a trademark name. But usually they're manipulated in some way for some human appearance attraction. And they could be drastically changed from what the insects and the birds need, because a person somewhere thought that that had beauty. Different colored leaves from the straight species is a no-no. And I will have a picture coming up to show you what I mean by that. But if the leaves are a different color, it means they're chemically different. The insects, the caterpillars can't eat them because different chemicals they've not evolved to overcome. If it has double petals or it has like fluffier structure than the straight species, the flower might not even be making any nectar or pollen, and insects may not be able to get to it if it is making any. So straight species is the way to go. Here's an example. On the left, those purple colored leaves are a 9-bark cultivar called Diablo. Humans changed that plant to look like that. On the right is a straight species, and even in this picture you can see that that straight species 9-bark is blooming prolifically. It sets amazing seed. It attracts many more insects, and it will host different caterpillars on its leaves, whereas the one on the left can't. It doesn't. I planted the one on the left before I knew better. Okay. When you're thinking about putting in your native plants, design for structure. Decide where you want to place your native plant habitat based on the function you need it for. If you need to get to it, if it can't just be a meadow or it can't just be a woodland, you have to think of how you're going to tend it, because everything takes care, and what its intended purpose is. If it's a meadow, to provide for diversity in plants and food for wildlife. If it's a woodland, choose shade-tolerant plants that are going to provide nectar and pollen and berries. If it's a rain garden, because it's in a spot on your property that you are trying to soak up excess water, slow down rainwater, use plants that put down deep root systems for those purposes. In this part of my property, I wanted to have a little picnic nook. My kids pick on me because I told them years ago, I want to have rooms outside. I'm going to create all of these rooms. And they're like, that sounds dumb. What are you talking about? So this one, I wanted it to be like a little dining room, a little picnic area. May 2019, I sat at the picnic table there. I was like, we're going to do this. We planted in July. You can see it evolving. I've got a little bit of privacy there in August. There's another hazelnut that the squirrels later stole. By last fall, you can't see that picnic table. That's the area. In, what is that, 2-3 years? When you walk around to those planters, that's what you see. Then you can see the picnic table, but not until you get there. So in less than 3 years, I created a whole room just by picking the right plants that would grow quickly and do that. And then the picture on the bottom right is sitting at that picnic table and looking out. It feels enclosed. It feels nice. It feels like an adventure. You want to go in there and check it out. You can be very formal about it. You can write down on paper everything you want. You can put the number of plants you want. You can do that. You can make that come to life. That was a new planting just last year, so we will see how it goes. Or you can, if you're not creative, you don't know how to design, which it's hard. That's the hardest part for me. There are resources to look at. Ready-made gardens that you can go right off that list if you have those growing conditions. Or you can switch them out, do a little research, talk to people who know which plants to pick. Lots of resources, lots of websites that have these designs and these kits. Prairie Nursery has a lot of good resources, but I am most excited about this one because Hungry Hook Farm is a native plant nursery. It's in Lancaster County. She collects seeds. She grows from seeds, so you've got great genetic diversity, and she's brand new for this year, putting together kits for gardens. The grid is there. You plant it per the grid. It comes with 50 plugs to do that. This is a great resource, so I highly recommend checking her out. She's wonderful. Or you can just...
Who was that outfit we saw down at the?
I can't hear you.
Who was that lady at the Philly garden show? We saw that made those garden kits.
I'm not sure.
You don't remember?
Mm-mm. If you want to be a little bit more spontaneous about it, down in the bottom left corner, I put cardboard down and put some leaf bags. I knew I was going to plant something there at some point, but I didn't know what. All that spring, I just gathered plants that I knew would grow in those conditions, but I didn't really have a good formal idea. I finally amassed enough plants that I was like, okay, we can do this. I put them in, and it became a garden. So it can be as formal and planned or as not formal as you want. Just make it happen. I had a problem, actually 2 problems in my yard. I had a lot of standing water after heavy storms, and we're getting more and more heavy storms. So I said, let's plant some plants to try and help absorb some of that. I started small. The following year, they bloomed beautifully. I was so excited. I got certified for the wildlife habitat certification, put the sign there, kept watching the plants bloom. It was amazing. And then I decided, well, let's add to it. So I put another tree there. I did some other stuff, cardboard mulch, got a flood of plants, put them in, watching them just expand and expand. This is a little tree in the front, tiny little tree. I've been loving watching it grow. It's like 4 feet high now. So excited. But now my sign's buried, so I had to move it to the front to do some editing, pull out some things. This was last year. I didn't have to pull out one, so that's a whole wheelbarrow full of Japanese stiltgrass. I did it that one year. I got it before it seeded. This last year I pulled out one blade of grass. So I'm thankful I got on it early there. And in the winter, birds in here all the time because there's seeds, there's insects hiding in those stems that they can eat all winter. You can see my empty bird feeders in the back of that picture. I don't fill my bird feeders much because I have all this great stuff for the birds that they want to eat. So I moved the sign forward. I am controlling rainwater, providing habitat, all where turfgrass used to be. So it's just great. It's the other side of the property. Both sides, I live on a narrow acre and both sides were just running with water. I did even less prep for this side. I was like, I don't have the time to prep this big acre. I just pulled back the grass right where I was going to plant. I mounded it up because I knew if we got another heavy rain, it was all just going to run away. So I mounded up that turf that I had just kind of scalped, and I planted. I planted plugs and little whips and stick-looking little trees, just tiny things, and that was the same year. Like, it is amazing how fast these things happen, and then how beautiful they are through the seasons. In the winter, again, birds all the time. Just lovely. Filled with blooms, not that hard. It can feel overwhelming. When I looked at my whole property and all of that turf grass that we moved into, that we were fortunate. We were fortunate to get an acre of land. I'm so happy. This is what we moved into. And then falling in love with native plants, this is what it looks like. Filling over the years, less than 10 years, and there's still too much turf grass. I'm still working on it, but we can do it. This was just last month. Lots of fun things to look at all winter, all year. Start simple. Shrink the lawn. 32 gallons of water every day for every man and woman and child in the U.S. is used to irrigate lawns. That's craziness. Chemicals that are used by lawn care industries are killing us. They're banned in most countries because they know they're killing us. Fertilizers end up in our groundwater and in our streams, and it's just not good. So, one of the best ways to start shrinking your lawn, start under your trees. You already shouldn't mow under your trees. If you're fortunate enough to have native trees that are hosting Lepidoptera, they come down, a lot of them, to pupate in the soil right under the tree, or they'll crawl off a short distance. If you're mowing up to your trunk, you're killing anything that may want to live there. If you leave snags, this tree's dead. It was a native, it was a non-native plum tree. We thought we were going to do a little, orchard, thank you. A little orchard. The plums went quickly because we don't use chemicals, so Japanese beetles had a field day and killed them in 2 years. But I leave that there because there are insects there, and the birds, the woodpeckers, just up and down those stumps all day. Plant under trees, living or dead, and you will decrease your turf grass. If you're planting under mature trees that have shallow roots like maples, pick very small plants to start under there. You won't want to get a big gallon or 2 gallon size shrub to put under there. You would like shrubs under there, that would be great, but let them grow slowly and get their roots in there slowly instead of digging a dig hole. What did I even say? Digging a big hole and wrecking a lot of the tree's roots. Put roots in, put plants in small so they can get their roots in there around the established roots. Allow for succession. Keep an eye on what volunteers on your property. This was another one of those dead plums. I really liked the shape of it dead, so I kind of trimmed the branches so I get to see birds sit on them and perch. But I had a baby eastern red cedar volunteer there, probably a bird who was perched on the dead limb, pooped out a berry, a seed, and there I have a tree. So I watched what grew in, I allow for it, and I think that the dead branches cradling it are just so aesthetic. It's like art.
It is.
Deadwood is really significantly important in landscape, and we don't leave enough of it. I wanted to read this fact that is too small on there for you to be able to see. I want you to hear it. Let me find it. Deadwood is indispensable for food, residence, and as a breeding place for well over a tenth of the life on land. That blew my mind. Each decay stage has its own flora and fauna, and many nutrients pass through dead wood and the soil back into the natural cycle. So leaving dead wood when you can. I don't necessarily recommend transporting dead wood from other places because it could harbor things you don't necessarily want. But when you have a branch that falls from your tree from a storm and whatnot, move it to a location, line a path, leave it on your property whenever you can. Less tidy is better. This isn't directly under a tree, but I had a mature tree that was casting shade in the afternoon that I thought would be a great place to plant some woodland plants that would like that part sun, part shade. So you've seen how I do it, took away some grass, put in some plants, and this is what it looked like over the summer. Beautiful. You can't see that picnic area, that little seating area now. It was another room. And it just happens quickly. Turfgrass, if you have too much of it, pick a spot and think about how easy it's going to be to mow around. I have not made the easiest mowing obstacles for myself, but I'm the one who mows 7 times a year. So a planting plot is better wider than narrow if you can manage it. Plant in a community and consider the mature size. In all of those layers we talked about, you can mulch with hardwood, with leaves, with coconut coir. Add a border, it shows intention, and you can expand it over time. I've done that with this bed also. I just expanded it right down the line, and it's kind of at the edge of our property, so I just keep expanding the border out. And you can see I pick borders that I can easily pick up and move forward, so I let the plants in the beds expand themselves. They want to volunteer, a lot of babies out there, so those are free plants for me. When you can, leave the leaves and the stems. This whole collection of leaf bags I rescued from my neighbors, and I put a call out there on Nextdoor to anybody who wanted to go to all the hard work to rake up all their leaves and all of those baby butterflies that I imagined in those bags that were going to go off to the trash. I went to their house, I picked up all their bags. I now keep them safe. I use them to hold down cardboard for future projects. I wait at least a whole year from when I collect a bag till I will use it. I do have a leaf shredder, but I won't do that for the first year. I let those open. If there's anything in there hibernating, cocooning, I give them a year to get out before I'm going to chop them up. Or just don't rake it all. I just leave my leaves. And if I went out there today, you wouldn't be able to tell. They're already decomposed. Like, it happens so quickly. I don't know what the fuss is all about with people and their leaf blowers and all their noise. But because I don't cut down my raspberry stems, I get to see these native praying mantis uthicas. They had a safe place to be over winter. Because I leave my elderberry canes and stems, the bees can make holes in them to hide, and then the birds can come and chew them out, but they have a place to have their life. Healthy Yards, if you're on Facebook, posts a lot of good graphics, and Heather Holmes is another biologist who studies native bees, and she has come up with some new data that shows how to create stem nesting bee habitat, leaving your stems, if you have to cut them, if you really feel tidy is the way, leaving at least 6 to 12 to 18 inches of stem still up. Your new growth will not be hindered by that, and leaving them for more than one season. Like, the second year is when these bees tend to use the stems per her research. I don't typically take anything down unless like a stem has fallen over a path that I need to use, and half the time I just step over that. So you can see the old stems that were left in this bed. New growth is coming up just fine. A few months later, nothing has been impeded because I didn't tidy up. And as you can tell, it thrived with nothing being done. And that was all turf grass a few years before that. So leave the leaves, everything grows right around it. In the different seasons, you see how lovely everything looks. And full circle, the leaves are back down again. Because I don't tidy up, I get to find these fun cocoons walking around. And then sometimes I'm able to identify them. But then I have a terrible memory, so I can't tell you without looking what they are. The left one is a variegated fritillary, however you say that. Somebody did tell me what the one on the right was, but I didn't write it down, so I can't remember. And then two more examples of the native praying mantis ficus. I find them everywhere. The top one is underneath a wire hanging basket, and the other one's on a bench. I find them on tree branches, all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of programs you can apply for to get signs that say, hey, I'm not a crazy person. People like do this on purpose, and look, I'm doing all these great things. Might help your neighbors realize, and just draws attention and education to the fact. I'm giving a presentation for my township on Monday that covers all of these programs and their requirements, qualifications, prices, all of that stuff.
What township's
North Coventry Township, and I think that they have advertised it on their Facebook page and website, like with a link if you're interested. It's by Zoom, so.
And on the township website. And it'll be recorded and be available forever on once they put it up on the township website.
Great. Weeds have, it's gotten a bad connotation. The definition is a plant that's not valued for where it is growing, and it's usually a vigorous growth. But lots of our native plants have the word weed in their common name because they have bad PR people. So a lot of weeds are really beneficial. Just because it's called a weed doesn't mean it's an invasive plant. It just means you don't know what value it has right now. A lot of weeds are friends. The plant on the left is not a native plant, but it is very low on my eradication list because it's there blooming, providing nectar. The one on the right is a violet. It's native, it hosts caterpillars, it provides nectar and pollen. It's a great native plant. Both of them are just growing in my turf grass. There, they can stay all day. In fact, when I'm putting in native plants, I will move the hole that I planned 2 feet to the left or right if I have violets volunteering because I love them and I want them to be there. So I will work with them and move around them. Other plants, like the one on the left, that aren't native but aren't out competing anything and are doing better than turf grass can stay until I have a better native plant that needs to be there. But I would have, under no circumstances, poison it or dig it up or, just out of turf grass. That's crazy. Dandelions. Now's about the time you're going to start seeing the memes about dandelions being the first things that bloom in spring, and they're such a great resource. They're not native. They are okay, but they are blooming at the same time that our native pussy willows are blooming, and those pussy willows are packed with protein in their pollen, whereas dandelions have a little bit of protein. They're better than the turf grass, but if I have to dig it up, I'm not sad to put in a native plant.
Well, can I just add something to that? At least 4 of those plants that you just showed are herbal medicines that I use personally when they come up. The dandelion root, the whole
Yes.
leaves, the flower.
What's that?
Dandelion makes a really good wine.
Yes,
good
yes.
wine.
So,
Yeah.
yes, there
that's-
are lots of medicinal
Yeah.
reasons
dead
to use
petals.
lots of different plants, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
One time I got to go on a medicinal hike with somebody, and they were talking about all of these great plants, and they were all invasives, and I'm back there going, but you wouldn't want to let that grow if it like wasn't there. You would take that out and put something else in. That's two sides of a coin
It's a balance,
that
yeah.
we just have to be cognizant of, for
Yeah.
sure.
As long as you don't put poison down and you're doing it some other way.
I'm sorry.
As long as you don't put poison in the ground to kill those.
I completely agree, yes, we need no poison. These were two weeds that were growing that I wanted to see what they turned into. One was goldenrod and one was boneset, both really great native fall nectar sources. And I got to have them because I just let it grow and see what happened, and it turned out to be good things. And a lot of times that will happen. Replace non-natives when you can. Before I knew better, I went to Lowe's because I thought that's where you bought plants, and they were on sale, and I got liriope, and I got Japanese spirea, and they were beautiful, and I thought, oh my god, I love this so much, it's so great. Then I learned about native plants, and I was like, what did I do? So I finally got the chance to rip them out, and I felt bad because then my chickens and my ducks didn't have any privacy, and like they couldn't do their little business behind the bushes, so I felt bad, but I waited for just a few months, and privacy coming back. I got some elderberries, some snake root volunteers, and in the fall things were still lovely. My little sassafras tree, which was one of the first native plants that I put in, is looking lovely, and no worries about privacy. By June, I had to actually cut out a walkway to the coop because the plants wanted to grow there. You can save money and sow your own seeds. We talked a little bit about winter stratification. You can grow a lot more things by seed. On the cheap, Wild Seed Project is a great place to learn about winter seed sowing. Checking BONAP for your regionality to get plants that are as close to your ecoregion as you can. You can winter sow just like this outside right about now. Let the rain and the little bit of snow we're going to get fall on them. Just protect them from the birds that want to eat them and the squirrels that want to carry them away. And then you get plants. And then you put them in the ground, and that was way cheaper than I would have bought them for. That's how that bed got made with those winter seed sown senna. Or you can do it like your vegetables if they don't need stratification, or if you just like the labor of stratifying things and growing them indoors. I like to do it outside. It's much easier. Just plant natives.
What do you mean by
Last-
stratifying?
I'm sorry?
What do you mean by stratifying?
So stratifying is the way that the seed coat gets broken. A lot of seeds need to go through cycles of temperatures below 40 degrees, moisture. They will have an assigned amount of days that through research it takes 30 days of temperatures below 40 for them to break their seed coat and germinate. That's what I mean by stratification. Lots of books that I recommend, a list here that keeps going. I won't read this, but it's my favorite quote by Ben Vaught, did his book, The New Garden Ethic. I should put what page that's on.
Actually, read it. No one's gonna be able to read it, or so, and then
Or-
people in Zoom.
Okay.
I mean, people in Zoom can, but no one here can have the time to
Your
read it.
garden is a protest. It is a place of defiant compassion. It is a space to help sustain wildlife and ecosystem function while providing an aesthetic response that moves you. For you, beauty isn't just petal deep, but goes down into the soil, farther down into the aquifer, and back up in the air and for miles around on the backs and legs of insects. You don't have to see soil microbes in action. Just knowing it's possible in your garden thrills you. It's like faith, and it frees you to live life more authentically. Your garden is a protest for all the ways in which we deny our life by denying other lives. Plant some natives, be defiantly compassionate.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's really good.
Yeah.
And then, here's the list. Take a picture, write them down. The nurseries within about an hour's drive where you can go to get native plants. And we are talking to other nurseries, your local garden centers, to try and get them to carry more native plants, especially straight species. But every time you go to your local garden center, go up and whoever's working, ask them for native plants. Ask them them where their native plants are, and if they've never heard of it or don't know what you're talking about, just tell them, and tell them to look up wild ones, do whatever, but put the bug in their ear, because the more of us that request them, the more they're gonna see they need to start carrying these things. Because until then, they don't have a big incentive to change what they're already carrying if people are already buying them. And they can't change over all of their inventory not knowing that they're gonna sell stuff. So if we ask for it, they'll know they have a customer base that wants it.
2 years ago, I went to Colonial Gardens and asked if they had a native section, because I thought maybe it'll be easy. And he says, nobody cares, so neither do we.
Oh,
So they're carrying a few
They
more
are
native
carrying a
plants.
few,
Yeah,
yeah.
I did the same thing.
I'm,
and now
I'm
they're-
still a little disappointed in what they're calling
It's
native,
small.
but
It's gotten
it's
a little
starting.
better.
But if you go and I go and everybody goes and asks for it, they'll get there quicker.
It's a catch-22.
Yeah.
Total catch-22.
yeah, even if you don't wanna buy one.
I'm sorry.
I used to babysit Eric. I'll pester him more.
Do it, yeah, tell him, we want natives, and not only us, wildlife wants natives.
Mhm.
We need to advocate for them. They can't go to the nursery and tell people that they want natives. This is Wild Ones, this is how you can reach me if you need anything. We meet monthly by Zoom, we go on field trips and outings, and we do stuff, all about native plants. You're welcome to join our meetings. They're on our YouTube channel. We get guest speakers in that have great things, that do much better presentations than I do, so to talk to you about all of this great stuff. Any questions? I know we're over time, I'm sorry.
Can you go back to that last slide, because I was taking pictures.
can.
A story I repeat all the time is Jessie tells people when she read Doug Tallamy's Bringing Nature Home, she tells people it changed her brain, changed how she thought about gardening, about having any type of property, about the ecosystem. It was really a transformative book, and Doug Tallamy's a great author. If you look up his videos, great message, little wry sense of humor, very gentle man with a very important message.
Jessie, can I make an announcement?
Yes.
That Doug Tallamy is coming to Phoenixville on May the 7th
Woo!
to Colonial Theater.
Oh,
So
awesome.
just put it on your calendar.
May 7th.
Are tickets available yet?
No, just a calendar alert.
Yes.
Okay. Jane, let me know. I'll start spreading that word too. Remind me.
Thank you.
He's a pricey speaker. Please support this and buy your relative tickets to go with you, because he is expensive to bring in to speak.
Somebody in the chat, I think, had mentioned something about Homegrown National Park sign. There are signs available. Previously, you had to download your own. There are some different organizations that are printing them and have doing fundraisers with them. Whether the sign is up or not, you can get on the Homegrown National Park map. My property's on the map. I was one of the first 100 people in Chester County to be on the map, so I tried to jump on the bandwagon really quickly, and signs weren't available then, but I think they are now. So you're right, that sign is not on there, but I'm on the map.
Did you
That's-
see the rest of that question?
That was started by Doug Tallamy, Homegrown National Park. That's
Yeah,
one of his big movements.
The question goes on, doesn't he, meaning Doug, suggest native plants make up at least 35% of your plants? That is, you don't necessarily need to eliminate all non-natives.
He recommends 75%, and the only reason, so I hear this argument a lot, that Doug says we only need 70 or 75%. The reason he says that is because if I told you you couldn't have a single non-native plant and you had to do 100% native, it'd be really hard to stick to that. And it would be really hard to draw people in saying you have to kill your grandma's lilac because it's not native. So it's a compromise that he is comfortable with, and the data shows that if you have at least 70 or 75%, you are still supporting a lot of things. 100% would be the goal if that were possible. But my property's not 100%. I can't get rid of all the turf grass yet. I have things that I just can't get rid of yet. But my goal would be 100% if I could snap my finger and make that happen. It's not realistic. that's why he says at least 70-75%.
There's a request for you to go put up page 2 of the book resources.
Yeah.
And then a comment, I notice you mentioned Octorara Wholesale Nursery. Right behind it is Groff's Retail Nursery. They don't restrict themselves to native plants, but their native plants are identified with decals.
They also don't confirm that they don't grow neonic free, and that's why I don't list them. I have resources on the Wildlands website that is a list of growers all over the state that guarantee neonic free plants. Groff's doesn't do that, so I don't advocate, though some of their things may be grown that way, and some of their things probably come from Octoraro that does say they grow neonic free. That's that reason.
Okay, they say good to know, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a question. So, not attempting anything like this by any means, but I wanted to attract some butterflies, so I planted some milkweed. And they got eaten by something or something. I mean, they just died pretty quickly. It wasn't, I mean, there were a couple caterpillars or a couple cocoons or whatever, you know, and, but the plant was just dying in front of my eyes. I don't know what it was that killed it.
Was the plant dying or was it being eaten by caterpillars?
I think it was dying because there weren't, I mean, it was like, you know, not the leaves so much, but the stems and
Yeah.
there were some other kind of bugs on it, I think, if I remember right.
Potentially. I mean, not every plant is going to live.
Right.
It depends where you put it. It depends if it's in the right conditions. Other things can eat it that you don't necessarily want. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but that,
Well,
you know,
it killed it, so.
yeah. I mean, if it got a pest,
Yeah.
it sounds like, instead of the intended caterpillar,
Yeah.
then it didn't get to function in the ecosystem the way you want it. Yeah.
Right, so a similar thing happened with the river birch, which I put in a low area of my front yard, which gets a lot of water. And I'm like, okay, they're native, you know,
Yeah.
I feel a little good about this.
They're also fairly susceptible to disease.
Are they? So I
Yeah.
went away for a couple months because I had to do something, and I came back and I was like, oh my god, like it looked like Japanese beetles.
Yeah.
So
They
what
love
Birch, they love birch.
So what should we do, or what insight can you give about what to do if something else is attacking the plants that from the goodness of your heart
Yeah.
you wanted there to help wildlife and
Right.
birds and all that
So,
kind
Give
of
us a
stuff?
penny
Japanese
for every
beetle,
Japanese
as the
beetle
name
we pick out the
sounds,
birch tree.
is an invasive pest.
Yeah.
So I knock them off and feed them to my chickens. They love them. If I didn't have chickens, I would knock them off and smash them. I don't advocate for any poisons. You can manually knock them off. The more you plant, the more the eating is going to be dispersed. You'll see it less. The less turf grass we have, the less Japanese beetles we will have, because their larvae eat the roots of turf grass. So my neighbor, who maintains 2.5 acres of turf grass, religiously mowing 3 times a week and leaf blowing for hours in January,
No
is
lie.
just creating a haven for Japanese beetle larvae that come over to have a buffet on my property, because he, when they emerge, has nothing for them to eat. So it's a challenge. It definitely is. Plant more. That's really the only thing you can do,
How
because
How about milky spore?
I can't hear you.
Milky spore?
Potentially, milky spore takes a couple years. If you've got a large property, you can look into it. It's an option. It kills the Japanese beetle larvae in the turf grass. It's a biological control that's an option.
What's it called again, milky spore?
Garden centers will sell it. It's an application you can put on your turf grass. But if you can plant plants to create an ecosystem that brings in predators, parasitic wasps, those kind of things, you'll have a better chance of getting rid of those pests that you don't want and bringing in the things that you do want.
I thought you could, be nice if you could cover, what are suitable plants instead of turf, or what you want instead of higher things. is something that people can walk on, kids can roll around and play.
Right.
So it can take some traffic. And I don't know if like, there's some native speedwells, but there's also non-native speedwells. Do you have a list of nice, small, suitable plants to, when you take out the turf, and you want for various reasons, to have something very low?
Yeah. There aren't a lot of native plants that are meant to walk on. That's why I say that the walking paths, it's great to have a little bit of turf grass there. It holds up well to foot traffic. It's mowable, 4 times a year or whatever, to keep it at a height where you can walk on it. Native plants aren't really meant to walk on necessarily, because they're feeding insects and they're doing all sorts of things. So I don't know that I would want to plant a bunch of native plants to draw insects in to invite my kids to roll around on to play. Does that make sense?
Right, but it's around a picnic area, a place where you're doing other things in the yard,
Yep.
along, the people who are in the urban areas between the sidewalk and the street.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be mowing and you want to take up the turf. So what
Right.
are other good alternatives? I've looked at, there's a mini clover.
Which is not native, right?
But
There are
native-
native speedwells. There are native speedwells.
Mhm.
There are lists of native plants that will grow under 3 feet and under,
There's some sedges and stuff.
there are
Right.
lots of native sedges. Yep. Again, they're not going to hold up to foot traffic, but they would do well if you pick the right sedge carex between the street and the sidewalk. That will do well in those conditions. In fact, if you drive into West Reading, they have a whole 2-block section where they have replaced turf grass with a beautiful carex that is there. It's evergreen year round. It flops over beautifully.
Yeah.
I've never seen it cut down in the 5 years that I've been paying attention to it.
Right.
So there are definitely options for native plant that will replace turf grass, but it's not necessarily a 1-to-1 ratio. I'm not going to find a native grass that I'm going to be able to walk on like I can turf
Right,
grass.
I don't care as much about the walkability,
Yeah.
it really just was that it's slower. So I've forgotten about carex, and between
Yep.
a mixture, it seems like instead of a monoculture, a mixture of things like
For sure.
Veronicas and carex.
Yep.
And,
Plants in nature typically don't grow as one monocrop. So the more species you find that take the same growing conditions that would be naturally found in communities and put them together, the better they're going to attract the insects that need to be at the different ones at different times, support each other's root systems. Yeah, I agree.
I just, in my experience, it passed along to anybody else who this might be useful, of the clovers, if there are tread-on, maybe actually cut once in a while, with a side or a cut, or even just tread-on, they'll stay smaller and they'll be miniaturized. And so then you have something that can be, serve as this low area for a path, for an occasional walk on, not
Right,
whole
and
lot.
it's better than turf grass, for sure. There are bee lawns that are being kind of advertised, and it has a lot of clovers and those kind of things in it. Again, they're not native, so they're better than a turf grass because they're providing at least nectar and pollen, potentially. But they're not serving as host plants. So it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to try and piece together, but so there are kind of levels to it. Better than turf grass, great. Is it native? No, but it's providing this function, okay. And then you can get up to other things where I don't have to walk on it. It's got to be better than turf grass. I can put in a whole planting of different level plants. Yep.
Someone on Zoom is asking, are native plants being sold in downtown Kimberton across from the grocery store?
Yes.
Yes.
The answer
Their
is,
little nursery is on Miller Road.
it's newly this year, I believe, that they started selling the plants that they're growing. I had some aspirations to try and reach out to them and see how we could help spread the word about that, but I have not gotten there yet. So, yes, I went and actually got some ferns and things there. The quality was really great. The prices were very reasonable. It was good to see that happening, and I hope that that expands.
Where
So
was-
when you go there, ask for more.
Where was that?
At Kimberton, Whole Foods in
Across the street,
Kimberton.
Put your nursery
across the
list
street
back
from the
up.
Whole Foods store. And their little starting area is on Miller Road in Kimberton.
Nice.
You mentioned letting things grow to see what they turn into. Can you talk about some of the apps that help you ID plants that you might recommend
Yeah, that's a
for
good
people
idea.
who want to let stuff grow and find
Yes.
out?
So picture this is the plant app that I use for identification. It is wonderful at identifying things. I would not follow its recommendations underneath for descriptions as far as it will list something as an invasive plant or it will list it as a weed or a nuisance because it's not thinking in an ecological lens. And it's just an app. It's only as good as the people who built it. So they weren't thinking about it as far as native plants. However, it will identify natives, it will identify invasives, it will tell you what the plant is. It's then on you to research that plant and see, does it belong here? Should I let it grow? Should I not? But it's a very good identifier, even down to different species of goldenrod, which is impressive for an app. And there was a study that showed that it was the most accurate of the plant identification apps. There's also Seek, Google Lens will do some things. It's better to cross-reference between a couple apps so that you're sure, or at least you're in a closer ballpark. And then good field guides are, very beneficial. And asking people, taking pictures I have people all the time come up and say, here's a picture of this, what is it? Letting me know what the growing conditions are so I know where it's growing might help me better identify if it's actually a native or not a native or, whatnot. But yeah, definitely identifying what's growing because there are spots in my property that I have not mowed for 2 or 3 years and I've let things grow. Some things have been great things. I've gotten a lot of good goldenrods that way. Some things are not great things. Multiflora rose. I identify early, I can pull it out. Oriental bittersweet. All those things that are dispersed by bird poop end up on my property because I attract birds. So you have to learn how to identify, especially those bad guys, early so you can pull those.
Can you put your nursery list back up?
There you go.
Thank you.